to the DCAHM. It's good to see you all at the beginning of the civic year. I see Councillor Goggins not here yet. Hopefully we're expecting him. If he arrives before we debate the only planning application, he can fully take part. We've got a fairly small but perfectly formed, good quality public forum presence. For the benefit of the gentleman, Mr. Bick, can I actually say there are just 3 housekeeping rules. Firstly, if you have a mobile, please switch it off, please. Secondly, if you need to use the toilets there by the entrance either side. Thirdly, we don't have any fire alarm planned today, so if it goes off, it's a real thing. And we go down to the right of the ramp, down towards the piazza by Bristol Cathedral and assemble there. But I trust that won't happen, of course. Before going on to the rest of the agenda, and I know we're dealing with membership later, we've got 1 new member this year and 1 loss, and the new member is Councillor Hussain. Sadly, she can't be here today because a member of her family, her daughter, is unwell, so we look forward to seeing her in the July meeting. She's replacing Councillor Steve Pearce. Can I thank Steve for the devoted service he's given. I did write to him and express our thanks on your behalf. And quoting the words of my late grandmother, I've said, thank you for your copper-bottom common sense. Whether actually an endorsement from me is actually something which will increase his street cred among the upping circles, I do not know. There we are. So we'll move on to item 2, which is confirmation of the chairman. So full council appointed me. Item 3, confirmation of the vice chairman, or though I suspect he'd be preferred to be called vice chair, Councillor Goggin. That was confirmed by full council. I'll now move on rapidly to the 4 main items of the AGM. For membership of the committee, these are set out in your papers. Can I move that to inaccurate? Andrew? Terms of reference, item 5, this hasn't changed from last year, so can I propose they're accepted? Andrew? And laterally, dates of future meetings. Again, this takes the principle established for years of alternating evening and afternoons, and DCB is doing precisely the same. Can I move those, Andrew? Thank you. 7, apologies for absence.
Yes, Chair. As you've already said, Councillor Farah Hussain has given her apologies, and also Councillor Guy Portney is substituting for Councillor Feehants.
That's fine, thanks. Item 8, declarations of interest. Are there any? No. Item 9, minutes of the last meeting. These are listed. Can I propose there a true and accurate copy? Andrew? Thank you. Would be even easier if I had psychic powers, so I knew you were going to say seconded. No. Go on. Item 10, action sheets of matters arising. Gary? Action sheet.
Sorry, Chair.
Action sheet.
Apologies, Chair. Yeah, two items on the action sheet, so I can. One referred back to the update I gave on appeals and particularly call-in decisions from the Secretary of State last time around. I think members of the committee have the relevant decisions, although they're quite a weighty tome. And I referred at the time that there are some kind of emerging lessons learned from that, particularly with regards to flooding. That work is still being put together because it does have implications for other sites in the city as well. So not in a position to provide that at the moment, but that work has started. And so if we keep that on the action sheet, I'll provide a further update next time around, if that's okay, Chair. And then the second action was for the case officer to circulate the proposed conditions relating to the application that was resolved to be granted permission last time around at Coronation Road with yourself, Chair, before issuing the decision. Now, I understand that has happened.
Last week. Yeah. Thank you. Item 11, appeals, Gary.
Thank you, Chair. I mean, given the lengthy update I gave the committee last time on appeals, I think by contrast this time around, I don't think I have anything in particular to update the committee on. Perhaps only to refer to the decision relating to the Windmill Public House, which was an application considered by the DCB committee. You'll see there that the appeal was allowed, so permission was granted for the change of use and conversion into 5 flats. Costs were not awarded, though. The inspector felt that there was an argument to consider when the committee resolved to grant to refuse permission. In short, the inspector there did confine himself to the one criteria, which was whether there are alternative provision in the local area, and the inspector felt that yes, that the alternative provision wasn't as extensive as the applicants had felt that there was, and indeed as our officers had felt that there was, but felt that still, having regard to equalities issues and barriers in the area, that there still was alternative provision. And so based on that, the inspector allowed the appeal and granted permission. That's something I'll feed back in a bit more detail to DCB on in 3 weeks' time. But happy to take any further questions, Chair, on appeals.
Are there any questions? Doesn't appear. As I mentioned to you, Gary, Councillor Plowden had words with me before. He's got some concerns about various planning enforcement matters in his award which haven't been listed on this appropriately. I suggested he have a separate word with you about that.
Yeah, happy to do that, Chair.
And item 12, enforcement, there isn't any.
No notices served since last time around, Chair. I have checked in with the team in the last few days, and some good work is being done on the kind of the backlog of HMO cases that we're working through at the moment. So progress is being made on those, and I think a couple of cases are nearing serving of enforcement notices.
Councillor Hume.
Yes, thank you. Just on enforcement, it's slightly, it would be something that would be interesting to look into. The lack of enforcement notices, the various things that I know that are problematic, and that perhaps local people feel haven't been looked into as well as or in a timely manner. And I'm just concerned that there's nothing here, and that very often that's a very short list. Whereas, you know, we put all these conditions on people, and then we don't always, they're not always followed through. And then developers, that if they don't, sometimes I feel that perhaps developers may sort of feel they get away with stuff, and so it's not setting a great precedent.
Thank you, Councillor Hume. Just to update you, as you're aware, a number of us have expressed serious similar concerns to you over several months. And as I mentioned last month, the matter went to a DC Leeds meeting. It was decided unanimously that it was more appropriate for scrutiny than us to look into the matter. So I wrote to David Wilcox and spoke to David, who's the chairman, of course, of the Growth and Regeneration Scrutiny Commission, and asked for it to be put forward on their working agenda. I think they were meeting yesterday. I again spoke to David, and he promised me he would raise the matter. So I'm sure I'll speak to him again that the issue, the concern you raised, will be addressed through that route. We then moved to public forum. Now, normally, of course, this would immediately be for each item, but we're only dealing with one planning application today, so we're now moved to that. We have one member of the public who submitted a statement and is here. The others are in your papers and has been sent to you by email, so I'm sure you've taken account of that. Mr. Boak, would you like to come to the centre? We have senior, I know you have some illustrations you want to bring to members' attention. We have read your statement, so all members have seen that. So you have about a minute, but if you stray just over that, I won't. That's fine, don't worry.
Chairman, councillors, the applicant's own elevation implies that neighbouring number 90 PV Street is taller than the applicant's number 90. This is not true. From the street, number 90 is the same height as number 92, undermining the character of the street and your own policies. Clifton Character Appraisal stresses the importance of maintaining the modest scale of this area. This application will counter that. It defeats BCS 22. It is against DM 27, 30 and 32. It is all no public benefit, only private. The fourth story overlooks and overshadows counter to BCS 21. My solicitors quote case law as recommending refusal. Importantly, CAP say this is an unacceptable scheme. It shouldn't be supported. My local councils have objected to the scheme. So I respectfully ask you to refuse this application.
Green. Princess Victoria Street is a highly eclectic mix of old and new properties. We moved into number 92 in the belief that an extension in line with the Catherine Green. Princess Victoria Street is a highly eclectic mix of old and new properties. We moved into number 92 in the belief that an extension in line with the President's death at number 88 would meet local planning guidelines. Planning officers have since recommended the proposal for approval. Following alterations to the original plans. It's in line with government policy to develop brownfield sites. The accommodation needs to be brought into acceptable living standards to become a livable home for a modern working family. 2 small bedrooms have been divided into 3 tiny rooms with just 1 communal living space, 1 tiny bathroom and a combined kitchen hallway. One of my immediate neighbours has been very supportive, but the other has chosen to wage a significant campaign against our proposal. This perhaps explains why 17 objectors do not live in Clifton, and of those, only 3 live in the Bristol area. I've seen this also with the statements. Hardly any of the people that have made statements today live in Princess Victoria Street, and not even in Bristol. The campaign has included leafleting, emailing, stopping people in the streets, as well as providing example letters to the council. While I've received support from a number of our neighbours, we have asked them not to get involved for fear of causing unnecessary division in the street. We've considered moving, but I cannot let my teenage daughters see that we're being bullied out of our new home. Thanks for listening.
The sound quality wasn't great with that, but I hope members, if they listened carefully, basically got the gist of that.
Chair, it was the same. We read the statement as well. It's pretty much the same as the written statement.
It was.
Yeah.
I mean, clearly, Mrs. Green was advised to speak to her statement, so that we had a written copy of that, of course. Can I say we'll move to the issue itself now, but can I say at the outset, obviously, in both sets of statements, there are some non-planning issues that allegations made. Members must actually ignore this and purely focus on the germane relevant planning issues, of course. Media.
Cool. Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, everyone. So we have an application for 92 Princess Victoria Street. And the reason we're here before committee today is because of the number of objections that were received, so it's a bit contentious in nature. But our recommendation now is for approval subject to conditions. The application site is a terraced property in Clifton Village. Although the area is predominantly Georgian, the house itself was built in the early 1970s. In the map at the bottom, you can see there are a number of listed buildings around the site, which are shown in purple, and a number of protected trees, which are shown with green circles. So the screenshot above shows the existing roof of the dwelling and how it fits within the wider context of the terrace. There are a variety of roof shapes, as you can see, and also a number of materials that are used for the roof, and also a variety of roof pitches. You can see there are a number of mansard roofs already in the area, surrounding both sides of the property. So number 90 on the right of the property was also built in the 1970s, and the mansard roof to 2 doors down on the right at number 88 isn't original, and we approved it in 2017. The mansard roof to the immediate left of the property is an original feature of the historic dwelling. So we have a couple of photos from the rear. There is quite a significant level change between the rear elevation of the dwelling and also the rear garden, although we understand that this is a feature quite common in the area. So for the application itself, the proposal entails a mansard roof with 3 front dormers and 2 at the rear. There would also be a roof light along the flat section of the mansard roof. The roof would be finished with slate tiling, and the flat section on the top would be finished with EPDM, which is like a rubber membrane. And both the front and rear dormer windows would be finished with slate also, and would have timber windows. The rest of the elevation would be as existing, and although it's a bit small here, the rear dormer windows would have opaque glass, and one of the windows on the front would have opaque glass. Here are the dimensions of the roof pitch and also the setback from the front and rear elevations. So the standard publicity and consultation was carried out, and we received a number of objections. Following this and taking into account our own assessment, we consulted with our city design group and also a number of members in the householder team. We then amended the scheme after a couple of rounds of negotiations with the agent to get it to the point that we're happy with at the moment, although there was a feature that was omitted, which was a walkway and fire escape to the rear, and that was omitted at the wishes of the applicants. Once that was to that point, we then reconsulted, and since the consultation period has expired, I've also received 4 new objections in the run-up to this meeting today. So of the 46 objections we originally got, 11 originate from outside of Bristol. and the rest are mainly from in around the Clifton and West Bristol wider area. The number of objections, as I say, are the reason we're here today. In terms of what can be considered a planning material consideration, the objections were primarily concerned with the principle of development being contrary to the precedent of the area and not being sympathetic to the character of Princess Victoria Street. Objectors were also concerned by the potential amenity impact of the roof being overbearing on both the front and rear elevation, and also potentially being overbearing and overshadowing to the neighbouring gardens. So in terms of our assessment, we do consider there to be a variety of roof pitches and shapes and also materials in the area, with a number of mansard roofs present nearby. So taking this into account, we do think that the design would be sympathetic to the roofscape of the area, and would also be materially subservient given that the materials used are also present elsewhere in the conservation area. So as I say, we consider the principle to be reasonable. We also think the scale would respect the hierarchy of the dwelling in terms of that it wouldn't resemble an additional story and would appear as a subservient mansard roof. So the street scene, as I say, would also be minimally affected, and the impact as such wouldn't be excessive or overly dominant. And in terms of amenity impact, we think that the roof pitch, the height of such, and also the distance that it's set away from the rear elevation would prevent any overshadowing or unreasonable sense of overbearing on neighbouring properties. And just lastly, one of our amendments which we put in quite recently was to implement the condition here just to ensure that the windows at the rear elevation are permanently obscure glazed to prevent any overlooking.
Thank you, Amelia. You did actually overrun by 1 minute, but view of the fact it's the first time you've been here, I'm being excessively generous now and probably dangerously liberal. That's okay in this circuit, as long as you don't do it again. Thanks. Now we move on to questions. I've got one question which may have been actually addressed by your summation, was about the variations in the roof heights. I think clearly you indicated there was a variation of styles, but Mr. Bake did specifically mention that number 90 and number 92 are different heights. What's your comment to that?
So the general trend in the area is that the eaves height in comparison to other dwellings will generally mean that the roof pitch is taller. So yeah, the eaves height of number 92 would be taller than the properties to the left and is the same height as number 90, as you say. We think that the scale of the roof in that it would be angled away from the front elevation of the dwelling. The angle of the pitch, the setback of the dormers, and the height of the roof would ensure that that hierarchy that's present along Princess Victoria Street wouldn't be detrimentally impacted.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I'm just slightly concerned that the plans that were submitted by the applicant don't seem to properly reflect what you would see from the street scene, and I wondered if you had any pictures that would sort of give us an indication of what we'd be looking at if this was granted.
So I think I did miss out on some street view images here, but we did do a site visit, and yeah, we appreciate that there's not any pictures like that here today, but we did think that the angle would be, the height of the roof would be mitigated by the impact on the roof.
Yes, it's a common situation with planning applications, because what we have submitted to us for approval are sort of technical elevations, and inherently they're flat and from the same angle, and you get this perfect view of the whole elevation. But in lots of situations, and particularly with a relatively narrow street like this one, you never ever get that view. So it always seems a bit strange when you see a street view like that and then an elevation that shows a pitch, and you think, well done, you just don't see that. And that's because of the constraints of the area. So what we all have to do when we're assessing a planning application is look at the technical plans that are submitted, which are kind of accurate, but then kind of assemble them and put them into their context, really, and try and get an understanding as to what you would see and what you wouldn't see. On a major development, you'd get more like CGIs and, you know, town and visual impact assessments and things like that. On a householder application, you just wouldn't normally get that, really. So it's a case of kind of combining the technical information that's submitted with things like street view and what you see on site. So that's the reason between the apparent difference between the submitted plans and then what you see when you're stood at the angle that you can within the street.
Tom, are you satisfied with that?
To some degree, although I have seen plenty of smaller applications that have come in where there is that difference presented by the eaves. They've just made the eaves a dotted line so you can see the roof behind them and get an idea of how much of the roof you can see. So it just seems a bit of an oversight on their part that wasn't included here.
I have to assume that was a rhetorical question on your point. John?
Just two questions, if I may. Whilst you're on that view there, are you saying that the house 2 doors up that has the dormer windows at the top, is that similar to how this property would look?
So it would be, from what we understand, roughly the same height, but the pitch of this one would be much more angled away from the property. I'm not sure how, yeah, okay, it's not shown the best there, but from the aerial image there, it does show that that mansard roof is much closer to the front elevation, whereas this one would be set back by much more, and would also have more of a pitch away from the elevation. So we think that it would look still subservient to that and wouldn't appear more overbearing than the one at 88.
Thank you. And the second question was just in relation to the objections, of which most of them seem to be very similar, shall I say, in their complaints. Obviously, there was an issue made about the number of complaints being from people on the outside of Bristol or not living in the area. I don't suppose you know how many of those people that don't live in the area were also complaining about it being overbearing on the garden of the property next door? Was that a common theme with those objections from people not in the area?
Generally, they were more, they were mentioning basically being contrary to the character of Clifton Village. A few of them had mentioned how they'd visited Bristol before and kind of appreciated the built form of Princess Victoria Street. So yeah, a lot more of them were related to the character rather than the amenity aspect of the scheme.
Andrew?
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, just a further clarification. So with that picture in mind, if I'm standing there, how will that view differ if we give permission for this application to go ahead? Because at the moment, you can't see the mansard roof immediately next door to the right, but there is a mansard roof there, isn't there? So for number 92, would it be sticking up higher? Would we be able to see it from this viewpoint?
I think you would see it, but it would not be significant. We think it would have less of a visual impact than the one at number 88.
Yeah. So just to reiterate what Councillor Hathaway said, I think it really would be useful if we had sort of better images so we can picture exactly not only what's being proposed, but how it will look from various angles as well. Just a simple dotted line would be very useful. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, some of the objections were about overlooking. I've got 2 questions related to that. What's the distance between the back of this house and the back of the houses on Caledonian, whatever. Crescent Road.
So on Google, so I'm not sure how exact it is, but it's measured about 21 metres.
Okay, thank you. And then the other question about overlooking. So I had a look I went and had a little wander down there last night, and my impression is that if you were in the top floor, the current top floor, you would look down into the upper floor of the house opposite on Princess Victoria Street. Do you think that's correct, as it is at the moment anyway, they'd be overlooking?
As in, if you were in the proposed roof, you'd be looking across the street.
If you were in the top floor now, where it is, the current top floor, and you looked across the road into the other house, my impression was that you would see into the house across the road now anyway.
Possibly. I'm not sure, to be honest.
Yeah.
I think the point that Councillor Hughes was making there is valuable, because we've got properties at a certain distance away anyway, and this is an additional a floor, but it's designed not to be as apparent as an additional storey set back and with the pitch kind of sloping away. But yeah, there is an existing relationship sort of face to face, and there will be inevitably a degree of overlooking from the top floor of this property into properties opposite. So yeah, I think I think that's got to be considered as the existing situation, and an assessment has to bear that in mind. Yeah.
Are there any further questions, Guy?
Thank you, Chair. Just a couple. Apologies, I'm not the best at architect drawings, and I was hoping you could clarify something for me. I'm just looking at the agenda supplement, and the very, very last page, the southwest the southwest elevation from the side. That does perfectly. Obviously, I can see where the inset and sloped section of the roof of, let's get this right, 92 is. The smaller white box set behind it, could you explain to me what that is? Is that another building behind it, or is that an aspect of the development that we're looking at now?
Do you mean which part, sorry?
So yes, the things labelled as number 5. Are those the window boxes?
Yeah, those are the proposed dormers.
Gotcha. Thank you. That's really helpful. And the other question that I had was, in terms of the reading through the public objection sheets, seems to be reasonably sort of split into two categories, largely those focused on Clifton as a conservation area and the historic nature of the street, and those focused on the amenity of the potential loss of amenity to surrounding residents. I'm just wondering, I've gone through the sheet a few times and it's hard to make out. Have there been objections from the neighbours whose amenity is threatened directly themselves? That's the thing I'm struggling with. There seems to be concerns about the amenity of neighbours from people who aren't affected by it, but I can't see objections from people who would be.
I think we did get one, yes, from the property immediately next door. I can't remember off the top of my head, but it was on either side. John?
Sorry, if we could just go back to that previous picture, I just want to be absolutely clear, because this is the big point for me, is that aside from overlooking gardens and things, which looks like they're overlooked anyway, the big thing for me is changing the characteristic of the street, albeit a 1970s house. So if this was built at number 92, 2 doors up, that's number 88, yeah, that already has the higher roof and the dormer windows. Is the assumption that if this was built, it wouldn't be any more overbearing than 2 doors up, or it would be more overbearing than 2 doors up? Because the bit I'm just trying to get right in my head is, are people objecting to this being overbearing because it's more overbearing than 88, and it's hard to articulate this, if it's not any more overbearing than 88, then why are people objecting?
So we assessed the scheme on its own individual merit, but we did take into account that we have approved one at 88. We think that in terms of the setback and the scale of the roof, the relationship with number 88 wouldn't be over dominant on that. So we think that because number 88 does have a slightly higher eaves, we wanted to make sure that the perceived height of the proposed roof wouldn't appear to exceed that, so then it wouldn't, as I say, be over dominant on that. So our opinion is that it wouldn't have a greater visual impact than number 88.
I think we've dealt with all questions, so shall we move to the substantive debate? There are two main reasons why any application comes to this committee rather than being dealt with by officers. Firstly is there a key planning issue at stake, or is it something on balance we can accept? Secondly, has the volume of objections caused an issue of concern, and because of that, should we look at that again? And I think it's primarily the latter case here. That's why this has came to committee. And I agree with Councillor Geeta that, in my view, whilst I welcome genuine, authentic local responses, I'm a little bit questioning how relevant some of the out of Bristol ones are actually here. I believe, like any similar application, it has to be assessed and viewed upon its impact in the local environment. Here, it's in a conservation area. So does it do harm to the conservation area if it's granted? In my view, it doesn't actually. I also look at the design, the proposal, including residential impact. Does it adversely affect the residents and neighbours? I don't see evidence of that. I welcome the fact we now condition opaque glazing, which in my view will be beneficial. But on that basis, I think we should grant the application.
Thank you very much, Chairman. Yes, I was really concerned when I saw the huge number of objections for what is, in a sense, a very modest scheme. But I also note that the scheme has been amended in response to some of those earlier objections. So, I think I'm inclined to agree with the officer. Thank you, Emilio, for the report today. And I think the key issues of design, impact on residential community, I think they've been dealt with in that report. So I don't have any major concerns with this scheme. Thank you.
Ed?
I think I agree with that. I think this is a bit of a storm in a teacup. Thank you for your report and well done in your first appearance at committee. I can't see that it does substantive harm to the conservation area. I'm not sure it enhances it. The Princess Victoria Street is very eclectic in terms of its roofline and in terms of its buildings. So if it was a perfectly formed terrace, then maybe we would be of concern. But it seemed to have done what they can to ameliorate the concerns through negotiation. And the amenity, well, it looks to me like the gardens are very overlooked mutually already. So I'll be supporting this.
I don't see any further indications of speaking, so can I therefore suggest that the debate's been concluded and move the officer recommendation to grant, subject to conditions? Can I have a seconder, please? Thank you, Andrew. And can I do a name vote as normal? John?
4.
Guy?
4.
Tom?
4.
Ed?
4.
Andrew?
4.
And Philippa?
4.
And myself will vote for. So that's passed unanimously. Thank you. Can I thank the officer again for his report? Finally, can I draw your attention to our next meeting, which is the 13th of July at 6 p.m, and formally close the meeting.